Mr. Speaker, unfortunately this speech from the throne is a little bit more of a same old, same old. And having mismanaged the nation's finances for the last 2.5 years, the Prime Minister is now begging for forgiveness. We have gone from a position of 10 years of liberal surpluses, and in 2.5 short years we've now managed to achieve a deficit with this particular Conservative government. The warnings and the advice of the Liberal Party of Canada fell on deaf ears, and we are now facing an exaggerated form of economic turmoil in a greatly weakened position because of the actions of this government. 10 years of Liberal prudence has been thrown out in 2 years by this Conservative. In fact, the Chief Budget Officer of Parliament is correct in saying that we are staring down the barrel of many deficits to come. The first part of the speech from the throne recites many accomplishments, many liberal achievements over the previous years. Liberal achievements without attribution, may I say, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, I know, is fond of plagiarism, but even this plagiarism is on a grand scale. Paying down the debt, investments in health and education, controlling spending, a sound public pension plan, were inheritances of the Martin and Chrétien government. It would have been nice, not expected, but it would have been nice had the Prime Minister at least attributed to Messrs. Chrétien and Martin those accomplishments. Not only does he claim credit without attribution, he also announces that he is meeting the premiers in the speech from the throne speech. Well, last month, when the Leader of the Opposition suggested such a thing, he was ridiculed for even suggesting that somehow the Leader of the Opposition was being panicky. He was fear-mongering. Now the Prime Minister thinks it's such a keen idea that he even put it in his speech from the throne. It would have been, maybe possibly the Prime Minister was being just a touch economical with the truth when he neglected to mention that Canada in the first 2 quarters was actually running a deficit and that his government was already running a deficit during the election. His finance minister is on the CBC in an interview with Peter Mansbridge saying, "I'm not going to be the Minister of Deficits." And in a direct response to Peter Mansbridge, he said he couldn't imagine any circumstance in which the Government of Canada would go into deficit. And what do we read in the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, but that it would be misguided to commit to the balanced budget in the short term at any cost. You know, Mr. Speaker, in Scarborough-Guildwood, they call those weasel words. You know, Mr. Speaker, this may have something to do with the great axiom of John Crosby. Now, John Crosby was obviously not in our party, but he had quite a number of great sayings, but one of which was, if I told you what I was going to do, you'd never vote for me. And I think that's probably true of the Minister of Finance. If I told you what I was going to do during the election, you'd never vote for me. The Minister of Finance is supposed to be on top of the nation's finances. His department tracks GDP, revenues, expenditures on a literally a day-by-day basis. He either knew the government was facing a deficit or he should have known the government was facing a deficit. Again, as the chief financial officer of the nation, he's either being economical with the truth or he's just plain incompetent. The Prime Minister has nowhere to hide. Parliament's budgetary officer is quoted in the media as saying, "The weak fiscal performance to date is largely attributable to previous policy decisions as opposed to weakened economic conditions." No hiding behind the G20, no hiding behind the mess that's in the United States. It's due to the policies of this government. The article goes on to say, Page concluded that Ottawa could run a deficit as high as $13.8 billion next year, and in 2009-10. Deficits could remain higher than $11 billion each year through 2013 for a cumulative deficit in 5 years of $50 billion. Now, Mr. Speaker, $50 billion is a lot of money, even for Conservatives. $50 billion added to the national debt because of the incompetence and the mismanagement of this nation's finances, in spite of the advice of the Liberal Party of Canada. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne announces that the Conservatives now have religion, and they're going to experiment with responsible fiscal management. After having, for the past 2.5 years, run expenses at something in the order of 6 to 8% on an annualized basis, for a total of $40 billion over the last 2.5 years. So now, as I say, Mr. Speaker, they got religion. Now we're going to try out responsible fiscal management. The Prime Minister is going to be disciplined. Isn't that a novel idea? I wonder by what standard he's going to be disciplined. Is he going to be disciplined by the standard of GDP growth? Is he going to be disciplined by the standard of inflation? Is he going to be disciplined by the standard of people's wages? Or, Mr. Speaker, is it that Canadians are getting the discipline because of the lack of self-discipline on the part of this Prime Minister? Apparently, the Prime Minister is going to be fiscally disciplined without touching the major expenditures of this government. He's going to be fiscally disciplined without touching transfers. He's going to be fiscally disciplined without touching program expenses. Magically, somehow or another, the nation's finances are going to right themselves without touching either program expenditures or transfers. Oh, but on page 6, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you didn't miss this, we have dragged out, the Prime Minister's dragged out the favorite whipping boy, which is the civil service. And he's announced a new war in the civil service, and somehow or another that is going to be the answer to his lack of fiscal discipline in the past 2.5 years. On the other hand, we could take the approach of the Minister of Finance, which is to sell off government assets at distressed prices. We in Ontario, Mr. Speaker, have seen this movie before. You may or may not recollect, Mr. Speaker, that prior to one election, Mr. Harris decided to sell off Highway 407, a very valuable asset of the people of Ontario and the people of the GTA. The consequence of it was that he sold it for about 25% of its value. The new owners of the 407 flipped the property 2 or 3 years later and pocketed a tidy sum of money. The consequence, Mr. Speaker, is that we have virtually institutionalized gridlock in the GTA. That, Mr. Speaker, is what the people of Canada have in store for themselves as this government flip-flops its way around, trying to figure out what to do. They don't even have discipline on the revenue side, Mr. Speaker. Against the advice of every economist in the nation, they have reduced their revenues to the point where the cupboard is bare. Well, Mr. Speaker, who emptied the cupboard? The weak fiscal performance to date, according to Mr. Page, is largely attributable to previous policy decisions as opposed to weakened economic conditions, since nominal GDP is higher than expected in Budget 2008. That means, Mr. Speaker, is that Canadians are working. They're working harder and harder, and the government is squandering their hard-earned money. Having exacerbated the difficulties we are facing due to economic turmoil, the Prime Minister gives Canadians the advice, well, these are great buying opportunities. He gave that advice on October the 7th, Mr. Speaker. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, how much the market has melted down since then? 13%. And when I looked at 2 o'clock today, it dropped another 447 points. So not only should we not take advice from this Prime Minister on running the nation's finances, he couldn't even run a portfolio. Now he wants, Mr. Speaker, to share in the pain. He wants he wants our ideas. Well, this is after 2.5 years of ridiculing the opposition, the leader of the opposition. Now he wants our ideas. Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe we could start with a little less ridicule and a little bit more respect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.